Lena and James had been looking forward to their getaway for months. The quiet, secluded cabin by the lake promised peace, relaxation, and a break from their hectic lives. They needed it. The small town of Birch Hollow, where they rented the cabin, seemed perfect. It was the kind of place people rarely left. The local shops were charming, and the townspeople greeted them with small-town warmth. It felt like an idyllic little paradise far removed from the noise of the world. The first couple of days were exactly as they had hoped. They spent their time fishing, swimming, and hiking along the forest trails that bordered the lake. It was calm, the kind of serenity that made time feel like it slowed down. Evenings were spent watching the sun set over the water, its glow flickering on the surface like a million tiny stars. But then, on the third night, something changed. They had just finished dinner and were sitting on the porch, listening to the soft lapping of the lake against the shore. The air was thick with humidity, and the forest around them hummed with the sounds of crickets and distant birds. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. James went inside to grab another drink, and Lena stayed outside, staring out at the darkening water. It was then that she noticed something. At first, it was so subtle she thought she might have imagined it, a shape, just a shadow, on the opposite shore. The far side of the lake was just visible from their porch, but the view was mostly obscured by thick trees and a few low hills. Still, Lena squinted into the distance. The shape didn't move. It was standing still, just beyond the tree line. She shrugged it off, assuming it was someone else staying in one of the other cabins down the lake. Birch Hollow wasn't exactly a bustling tourist spot, but it wasn't totally empty either. James returned with the drinks and she pointed to the distant figure. "Hey, do you see that?" she asked, half expecting him to brush it off as nothing. James looked. Probably just a fisherman. Or maybe someone from the town. Lena wasn't sure. She had seen people by the lake before, but there was something off about this person. They weren't moving at all, just standing there, eerily still. "Maybe they're lost," she said, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping into her chest. But James wasn't looking anymore. "Let's just relax. It's probably nothing." For the next hour, Lena couldn't shake the feeling. She watched the figure, but it didn't budge, and eventually, her eyes grew heavy, the soft sound of the night overtaking her thoughts. By the time she went inside, the figure was barely noticeable in the dark. The next morning, Lena was still uneasy. She mentioned the strange figure to James, but he dismissed it again, saying it was probably someone who had been out there late and just left before they noticed. "You're just tired. You probably imagined it," he said, though he didn't look her in the eye when he said it. The day was beautiful. They went out on the lake in a small rowboat and explored the quiet edges of the water. Yet, when Lena looked toward the far shore, there was something that gnawed at her. She couldn't quite place it, but it felt like she wasn't alone. It felt like there was someone watching them. That evening, they returned to the porch after dinner. The sun had set, and the moon hung heavy in the sky, casting a pale glow over the water. The trees were eerily quiet now, no longer buzzing with insects. And then, Lena noticed it again. The figure was back. But this time, it was closer. Not by much, but enough to make her heart race. The figure was still standing motionless, staring into the distance, its outline barely discernible in the moonlight. "I'm telling you, something's not right," Lena muttered under her breath. James turned to look, and his expression tightened. The figure was definitely closer. It hadn't been there before, not at that spot. That's weird," he said, his voice low. "Maybe we should check it out. I'll go over there." Lena shook her head, but the discomfort gnawing at her was too strong to ignore. "No, let's just stay inside. It's probably someone out for a late walk." But James didn't seem convinced. His eyes were fixed on the figure now, his brow furrowed. "I'll be right back," he said, heading inside for his jacket. Lena sat there, watching him disappear into the cabin. She didn't know why, but the unease in her chest grew heavier. It felt wrong. There was something deeply unsettling about the stillness of the figure, the way it didn't move, didn't respond to the passing hours, didn't even acknowledge the world around it. It was as if it was waiting. But for what? After a few minutes, Lena got up to follow James inside. Just as she reached the door, a rustling sound came from the woods. She froze. The rustling didn't sound like an animal, it sounded deliberate, almost as if someone was walking through the underbrush, trying to stay hidden. She stepped out onto the porch again, peering into the night. There was no sign of James. The figure was still standing, but now it was even closer, so much so that Lena could make out the outline of a person, tall, thin, unnaturally still. Her breath caught. Suddenly, the figure turned. It wasn't moving like a person. It wasn't walking. It was gliding across the ground, its legs never bending, never making a sound. And then, before her eyes, it began to move toward her. Slowly. Uneasily. Her heart raced. She turned and ran inside, slamming the door behind her. "James!" she screamed. There was no answer. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she looked around the cabin, but he wasn't there. Panic surged through her. She ran to the window, pulled back the curtain, and peered outside. The figure had stopped. It was standing at the edge of the lake now, just staring into the water, its back to her. But it wasn't alone. There was someone else beside it. Someone smaller. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She could see them now. The first figure was tall and thin, its features blurred in the darkness, but the second was a child. A little boy, standing perfectly still beside the figure, watching the water. Neither of them moved. And then, with a sudden chill running down her spine, Lena realized, they were both facing her. In that moment, everything inside her screamed that she needed to leave. She turned toward the door, but the sound of footsteps on the porch stopped her. The door creaked open. James stood there, pale, wide-eyed, his face streaked with sweat. He was breathing heavily, as if he had been running. But when he looked at Lena, there was no recognition in his eyes. No comfort. No love. Just fear. Lena opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, he whispered, his voice shaking, "We have to go. Now." But it was too late. The figure was already at the window, staring in.